public, man, can you imagine when Tony G was screaming at Phil Hellmuth to get on his bike that like 10 years later he'd be in the European Parliament? It's like big, like kind of like Congress, like in the U.S., like that, but for like Parliament.
European Parliament.
Okay. Well, we're gonna see a three-way pot here. 3 bets.
In this video for PokerNews.com, we are playing 500, 1,000 with a $2,000 big blind ante. This was the $1 million buy-in cash game that took place at Hustler Casino Live. It's a big game. They're gambling. In this hand, Tony G, who really enjoys talking.
Only Tony G can do this.
He raises it up with 5-4 of diamonds. Under the gun +2, which is loose but fine, especially when you're playing very deep stacked. Next, Stanley Tang, who co-founded DoorDash. He was actually at an angel investment conference that I was at recently, and he gave a fireside chat, which was good and enlightening. I actually enjoy listening to Stanley talk compared to Tony G, who I do not enjoy hearing talk. All right, Stanley 3 bets to $10,000 with 6-4 of clubs. And this looks loose, but as the commentators say, Stanley is normally thought to be on the tighter side, and if that's the case, you should be mixing it up some portion of the time, and some of the best hands to mix it up with are marginal suited connected hands that are not quite good enough to call. So I like this 3 bet to $10,000 with 6-4 of clubs. Over around to Pav in the big blind with 9-8 of clubs. He opts to call $8,000 more, which is probably a little bit loose, especially from out of position. If he was in position, perhaps this would be viable, given they are playing roughly 1,000 big blinds deep, but you know, whatever. It's probably okay to call the 9-8 of clubs here. Back around to Tony G. He splashes too. Let's go to the flop.
Stanley playing super taggy. 6-4 of clubs, 9-8 of clubs, and Tony had brought it in with 4-5 of diamonds, and Tony flops the nuts. Tony G. And Stanley with a gutter here to a 5. If we see a 5 here,
flop comes Ace-2-3. Tony G has the wheel. It is a disaster for Stanley because he has a draw to a straight. Pav with nothing checks. Tony G checks, as he should do with his entire range here. And then Stanley goes for a $10,000 bluff. In this spot, you want to ask, which hands should I be bluffing with? And what size should I use? On boards where there's a straight already available that your opponents could have, you usually want to be betting using a small size, as Stanley does. When you are structuring your bluffing range, you want to make sure you're bluffing with some high equity draws, like flush draws, and then some very low equity draws that you can easily bet and then fold if you get raised, like gut shots or backdoor flush draws. And I think the 6-4 is a really good hand to bet with the idea that you're going to fold if you get raised. So I love this. You may say, should you even bluff in this spot? Someone's likely to have an ace. And you got to realize, even if someone's likely to have an ace, consider Stanley's range, especially if he is viewed to be on the tighter side. His value hands in this spot are going to be a lot of ace-king and ace-queen and maybe ace-jack. And ace-king, ace-queen, and ace-jack crush hands like ace-jack, ace-10, ace-9 suited, ace-5 suited, etc. So this 6-4 is actually a really good bluffing hand here. Stanley goes for the $10,000 bet. Pav folds, of course. Let's see how Tony G proceeds.
we could definitely see some blood and a slow play here from Tony G.
Tony G gets a little bit tricky. He opts to just call. I think I probably would have raised in this spot because Tony G does have some 5-4 suited in his range and some ace-2 and some ace-3, which certainly want to raise for value. And also, very importantly, Tony G also has a lot of flush draws in his range that may want to raise. Now, when you are super duper deep stacked, as they are here, you're going to find that you very often just want to start getting money in the pot immediately with your effective nut hands. And that's exactly what 5-4 is. It's the actual nuts. Because if you raise immediately, hands like ace-king, ace-queen, ace-2 are literally never folding, right? But there are a lot of turn cards that are really bad for those hands that may result in you not getting paid off. Say the turn is the 6 of hearts, right? In that scenario, now ace-king, ace-queen, ace-2 are going to be way less inclined to put in a lot of money. Also, 5-4 of diamonds is actually vulnerable to a decent chunk of Stanley's range, which are the ace-x of hearts and maybe hands like queen-jack of hearts. So I think Tony G definitely wants to raise immediately on the flop and just get money in. Now this time, that would not have worked out for him at all because the 6-4 would have folded. But in general, when you have a hand that's good but kind of vulnerable, and your opponent's range should do decently well in the spot against your hand, or they should connect pretty well with the board, usually you want to go ahead and put in a raise. Whatever though, he slow plays. It's probably going to work out. Let's go to the turn.
750k, yeah.
See if Stanley's going to continue to fire here, if he's going to take a card.
Yeah, everyone's special. It's like it's in Gardena. Rose gold.
Okay. It's not in the parking lot, right? It's not in Gardena, right? 55 pounds.
And he's going to go over the size of the pot here.
Turn is the Queen of Spades. Tony G checks, as he should do with his entire range. And now, Stanley has to decide if he should bet again. And he does. So, again, on the turn, you want to make sure you're bluffing with some high equity draws you can bet and then call a raise with, and then some low equity draws that you can easily bet and then fold. High equity draws here are going to be flush draws. Low equity draws are going to be a hand with a 5 or a 4. I don't think you want to bet hands like King 10 at this point. I think those have equity such that they could win at the showdown against busted draws, and you don't really want to bet and then fold out the best gut shot, because when you make the best gut shot, you always win, right? So I think you probably want to check back stuff like King 10 here a little bit more often than you check back hands like 6-4. So yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a good spot to bluff. When you are bluffing in this situation, you want to make sure you are betting using a pretty big size, because you're essentially saying, I have either a really good made hand, maybe ace, king, and better, or I have a draw, either high equity draw or a total trash draw. And when you're betting very polarized, it kind of implies you're betting infrequently with a range that has good equity. And that usually results in you wanting to bet big. So he does. He goes 55k. I love the way Stanley's played this one so far. Let's see if Tony lets him off the hook.
And obviously, Tony G with the nuts. And he's out of position. You want to build the pot up sometimes. You actually might take this for a call to have strong hands, but the board is very draw heavy here. He's going to double check. Strong hands to the river sometimes on a board that somebody might barrel off. And he is going to slow play here. 2 streets is going to make it look like he is weak.
Tony does not let him off the hook. He continues slow playing. I'm actually kind of surprised he continued slow playing here, because now the board is very draw heavy, and it's kind of easily for Stanley to have 2 pair or ace king that, again, may just not fold because there's a lot of draws available. I also think people generally presume flop and turn check raises are going to contain more draws / low equity hands than they will presume a river check raise will. So again, I probably would have put in a raise here. But again, it would not have worked out. Tony G's played this hand perfectly, assuming he knows his opponent's cards.
163 to the river, and the river's a king.
Ask for some rake back.
That's what I'm saying.
And Stanley literally with the lowest possible hand you can have here, the nut low. And this is why sometimes you would slow play with 4-5, try to get a guy to maybe barrel off, and it's gonna work. It is gonna work. Now, the nuts have changed here. It's interesting to see, obviously, what Tony G is gonna do. Would he ever just call? 150,000 here. Obviously, it's not gonna matter, but Jack 10 now is the nuts.
When you get to the river with a potential bluffing hand, as Stanley has here with his 6-eye, you want to consider, first, if you have a lot of value hands in your range that want to bet. If the river's like really bad for you and you don't want to value bet all that often, you don't get to bluff all that often. If the river's great for you to the point where you have a lot of nut hands in your range, then you get to bluff far more often. So, is this king a spot where Stanley gets to go for value very frequently? And I think he probably does, right? He can easily value bet ace king, ace queen, pocket queens if he has it. He probably doesn't have kings, right? Can he value bet ace 3 or ace 2? Probably, right? So he has a lot of value hands. So he should be looking to find a whole lot of bluffing candidates in the spot. If the river was not so good for him, he's going to be way less inclined to bluff. And usually when you're picking the bluffing candidates, the actual, call it showdown value of your hand does not matter all that much, because at this point, Jack high and 6-eye basically never win, right? So in scenarios like this, you want to block hands that will automatically never, ever, ever, ever fold. So which hands will never, ever, ever fold here on this river? That makes sense for Tony to have. Well, that's going to be Jack 10 of hearts and Jack 10 of spades, or 5-4 of any suit. So I think in this scenario, if Stanley has a jack of hearts or a jack of spades, or a 10 of hearts or a 10 of spades, or a 5 or a 4, he should be very inclined to bluff. I know it feels dirty betting in a spot where Tony's kind of likely to have an ace, but you have to realize Stanley is going to have all the best aces and some jack 10s that decided to keep betting the turn, and maybe a set every now and then. So I love this spot for Stanley to bet big, as he does, 150K. It's not going to work, but I mean, I think Stanley has played this hand amazingly well, and especially if you are viewed to have a more tight, aggressive-ish image, this is the type of play you need to work into your game. Again, it's not going to work for him, but I think this is an excellent play that just did not work out this time.
But Tony, by not raising the turn, is going to win himself an extra 150,000. 500,000 check raise.
Jack 10 of hearts, Tony. Jack 10 of hearts.
Check one card. Check one card.
One card. One card, Stanley.
Lucky card.
He flopped it. Now I got to ask you live chatters there, what if Stanley had ace-king? What if Stanley had pocket aces?
Tony G hems and haws for a bit, and then puts in $500,000. Obviously, Stanley's out. And the commentators ponder over whether or not Tony G should even raise, because Stanley could have the jack 10. And they also wonder, what should Stanley do with a hand like ace-king? And that's what I'm going to ask you. If you had ace-king in Stanley's shoes, or even pocket aces in Stanley's shoes, what would you do in this scenario against Tony G? Take a second, think about it, and write what you would do in the comment section down below. If you've seen very many videos on this YouTube channel, make sure you go down there and like and subscribe, by the way. You'll see more videos like this. We have learned that people don't check raise the river nearly often enough, unless they are loose and maniacal and insane. And even if they do check raise the river sometimes as a bluff, it's usually just not quite often enough. Most people do not over check raise the river as a bluff. So I think even with a hand as good as ace-king, you have a pretty easy fold. The reason is because in this scenario, Tony G could easily have 5-4 suited, and he could easily have the 2 jack 10s. Also, I don't think Tony G is known to be insane on the river, right? He's known to be loose, splashy preflop, and then I think mostly straightforward-ish when a lot of money goes into the pot, which, to be fair, is what a lot of cash game players do. So I think in this spot, if you get check raised on the river, ace-king just hits the muck immediately. What about pocket aces, though? The problem with pocket aces is that it does beat some hands that may check raise for value, primarily like pocket queens or pocket threes or pocket twos. Now, would Tony G put in $500,000 with pocket threes? I would think not. I would not check raise pocket threes here, because you have to realize in this scenario, Stanley has played his hand as if he has ace queen or better, right? And if he has ace queen or better, and he could easily have maybe the 5-4 suited bluff. I mean, you see he had 6-4, 5-4 similar enough. He could easily have jack 10, because this is a spot where he would probably bet the turn with all of his jack 10s. You got to be very careful raising for thin-ish value, because you may only get called when you are crushed. So if Tony G's not raising for value with sets, then aces loses to all the value hands, right? So the question then becomes, is Tony G going to find enough bluffs with hands containing a jack of spades, a jack of hearts, a 10 of spades, or a 10 of hearts? Or maybe just any random jack and 10. I would venture to say no. If you give Tony G in this scenario ace jack, is he turning it into a bluff? I don't think so. If you give him 10-9 of hearts, is he turning it into a bluff? I don't think so. And if that's the case, pocket aces is an easy fold. That's me for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, click the like and subscribe button below again. I appreciate it. Huge thanks to all these players for playing in these games and giving us this amazing content to make content out of. Also, huge thanks to Hustler Casino Live for putting on this game. Go on another video. Another fun one. It was an incredible slow play. I have this video lined up for you below. Check it out and enjoy. Thanks for watching.